The ballroom at Silvercrest Hotel glowed like a palace that night. Golden chandeliers spilling light across silk gowns and polished shoes. Laughter echoed through the air as rich guests clinked glasses filled with expensive champagne. Waiters and waitresses moved quietly through the crowd like shadows. Careful not to be noticed, among them was Elena, a young woman with tired eyes but a graceful step. She wore a plain black and white uniform, her hair neatly tied back, her hands carrying trays filled with crystal glasses. No one looked at her twice. To them, she was just another waitress, invisible, replaceable, someone paid to smile and disappear. But deep inside, Elena's heart beat differently. She wasn't meant to be here, not like this once upon a time. She had dreamed of standing on that very stage in the center of the ballroom, not as a server but as a pianist. She had studied music since childhood, her fingers once dancing across piano keys like they belonged there. She used to live with her mother in a small apartment above a bakery. Her mother worked long hours but always found time to listen to Elena play. Every evening when the world grew quiet, the sound of her piano would fill their tiny home. Her mother would close her eyes and smile, saying, "You'll make people feel what words can't," Elena believed her. Music was her language, her hope, her world. But that was before the accident. Before her mother fell ill and the medical bills swallowed everything. Elena sold her piano, her books, even her competition trophies. She took any job she could find, cleaning, serving, carrying plates, do anything to keep surviving. Each tray she carried felt heavier than the last, not because of the glasses, but because of the memories she tried to bury that night. As she moved between tables filled with glittering jewelry and loud laughter, Elena caught sight of the grand piano on the stage. It was a black Steinway, shining under the lights like it was waiting for her. Her breath caught for a moment. She slowed down, eyes locked on the instrument. It felt like seeing an old friend she'd lost years ago. Her hands tingled slightly, remembering the feeling of keys beneath her fingertips. "Hey waitress, over here." A man's voice snapped her back to reality. She blinked, forced a smile, and hurried toward him. He was impatient, tapping his empty glass against the table. "We're paying good money here, not waiting all night," he grumbled. His wife looked at Elena's worn shoes and smirked. "Don't spill anything this time." Elena nodded softly, keeping her voice polite. "Of course, ma'am." As she turned away, she heard them laugh quietly behind her, the kind of laughter meant to cut. She pretended not to notice. She had learned that silence was safer, but inside a small ache grew stronger. Each mocking word felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. Still, she kept her head down. Her goal was simple: finish her shift, get paid, go home. Hours passed. The music from the pianist filled the room, smooth and elegant. The guests clapped politely between songs. Elena listened from the side of the room, closing her eyes for a second. She could tell the pianist was good, skilled, but not passionate. Each note was perfect but empty. She remembered how her mother used to tell her that music without emotion was just sound, and she smiled faintly at the memory. In that crowd of powerful people, she felt smaller than ever, but she couldn't stop glancing at the piano. It called to her like a memory she couldn't escape. Every time she passed near the stage, her steps slowed just a little. She imagined sitting there again, her fingers finding their rhythm, her heart opening through every note. But she shook her head quickly. Those days were gone. Dreams didn't feed you and they didn't pay rent still. Fate seemed to whisper that something was about to change. Near the bar, she overheard two guests talking about the pianist possibly leaving early due to illness. The words stuck in her mind for a moment. Her pulse quickened. What if? No, she told herself, don't be foolish. No one here would ever let a waitress touch that piano. But even as she moved through the glittering room, collecting empty glasses and dodging arrogant smiles, she felt the music inside her stir again. It was faint, like a heartbeat under layers of silence. She tried to ignore it. Yet every note the pianist played made her heart ache more. When she looked at her reflection in one of the tall mirrors lining the walls, she hardly recognized herself. She saw the uniform, the weary face, the quiet posture, but behind her eyes, there was still that spark. The one her mother used to see. The one that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to crush it. The gala carried on and no one noticed the girl with the tray. No one saw how her eyes softened every time she passed the piano. No one knew that the quiet waitress serving them once had her name whispered with pride at music academies, that she had once been called a prodigy. As the night deepened, Elena told herself she would forget. She would finish her shift, go home, and keep surviving. But deep down she felt it, that strange electric pull in her chest, the feeling that destiny was watching her from across the ballroom, waiting for her to look back, waiting for her to take one step closer to the piano that would soon change everything. The night grew louder as the gala went on. The ballroom glittered with laughter, perfume, and pride. The guests, draped in diamonds and arrogance, barely noticed the tired servers weaving through the crowd. Elena moved carefully between the tables, balancing a tray of half-empty glasses. Her arms ached, her feet burned. But she kept her head down and her smile steady. Near the center table sat a group of high-profile guests, business leaders and socialites who believed the world revolved around them. Their voices rose above the music, sharp with wine and ego. "These servers always look so gloomy," one woman said, swirling her glass. "Probably never had a day of fun in their lives," another man smirked. "Or maybe they just need a reason to smile, like a real job." Laughter followed. Smooth and cruel, Elena heard every word, though she pretended not to. She had learned to let insults pass through her like air. But something about their tone that night cut deeper. It wasn't just the mockery. It was the fact that she used to dream of sitting where they sat, not serving them. The scent of roses and champagne clung to the air, and the sound of crystal laughter mixed with the faint notes of the piano from the stage. The pianist, a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair, played his set with practiced skill. Every note precise but emotionless. Elena's ears could feel the emptiness between the melodies. He played like someone who was counting minutes, not memories. She caught herself quietly whispering the next chord under her breath, her fingers twitching by her side. When the song ended, polite applause filled the room. The man gave a short nod and disappeared backstage. The host of the gala, a proud gentleman named Mr. Donovan, took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with charm, "our talented pianist will return shortly after a brief intermission." The crowd clapped again. Returning to their drinks, Elena made her way to the back corner where the other staff gathered. The kitchen door swung open and shut, letting out bursts of noise and steam. Her friend Maria, another waitress, nudged her and whispered, "You okay? You've been staring at that piano all night." Elena smiled weakly. "Just tired," she lied. Maria raised a brow. Tired or tempted? But before Elena could answer, a voice from behind startled them both. "Excuse me." "Waitress!" It was the same man who had laughed earlier, a heavy-set man with a gold watch. He was waving his empty glass in the air. "Another round." "And hurry this time," Elena nodded politely. Walking over as she poured his drink, a few drops splashed on the tablecloth. The woman next to him gasped dramatically. "Oh no, not again," she said, dabbing her dress though it was perfectly dry. "You really are clumsy, aren't you?" The man chuckled. "Maybe she's more of a janitor than a waitress." The laughter around the table stung. Elena froze for a second, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said softly, and turned to leave. Behind her, she heard another sneer. "Can you imagine her sitting at a piano? Probably bang on the keys like a toddler." For a moment, Elena's vision blurred. Anger, sadness, and humiliation flooded her chest. But instead of crying, she smiled to herself. That laugh, the same cruel tone, was what she used to hear during competitions when other students mocked her second-hand dress. But back then, she had always let her music answer for her. That thought stayed in her mind now like a spark waiting for oxygen. As she passed near the stage again, she noticed something strange. The host and the event coordinator were whispering urgently. The pianist hadn't returned. Mr. Donovan looked nervous. The show's schedule was running tight. Guests were beginning to grow restless. Some were tapping their glasses impatiently, others checking their phones. Maria leaned close and whispered, "Looks like the piano guy's gone sick or something." Elena looked up. Eyes widening slightly, her heart began to beat faster. "Sick?" Maria nodded. "Yeah, overheard one of the organizers say he left suddenly. Stomach pain or something. They're trying to find a replacement." Elena stood still, staring at the empty piano under the lights. Her pulse echoed in her ears. Every part of her body wanted to step forward, to say, "I can play," but fear froze her. What if they laughed again? What if she messed up? What if she made things worse? But then she heard it, soft laughter from behind, the same group of elites whispering again. Maybe the waitress should try. She's been staring at that piano like a hungry cat. That was the final push. She put her tray down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the stage. Mr. Donovan noticed her approach, surprised. "Miss, can I help you?" he asked. She swallowed hard, her voice quiet but steady. "Sir, if there's no one else to play, I can." The nearby guest turned to look, confused murmurs spreading like fire. "The waitress?" Someone said. "Is she serious?" Mr. Donovan blinked, uncertain. "You can play the piano?" She nodded once. "Yes, sir." The silence that followed felt like a test. The guests began whispering, amused and doubtful. "This should be entertaining," one woman said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let the poor girl have her moment." Elena stepped up the small stairs to the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging, laughing, waiting for her to fail. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the piano bench. She sat down, her apron still tied around her waist. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished black surface of the instrument. She took a slow breath, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room was silent now, every whisper replaced by curiosity. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their light a little stiller. For the first time in years, Elena was where she belonged, facing a piano, not a tray, and though fear gripped her heart, another feeling began to rise stronger, fiercer. It wasn't just courage. It was the sound of every insult, every laugh. Every night she spent dreaming of this moment. Gathering inside her, her chest rose and fell slowly. She didn't know what she would play yet. But she knew one thing for sure tonight. They would remember the waitress, not for serving them, but for silencing them. The ballroom fell into a hush so deep that even the clinking of glasses stopped. All eyes were locked on Elena, the quiet waitress who dared to step toward the grand piano. The air felt heavier now, thick with disbelief and curiosity. The guests leaned forward, their smiles half amused, half skeptical, expecting a disaster to entertain them. Mr. Donovan, the host, shifted uneasily near the stage. He didn't want to embarrass the girl, but there was no other option. The pianist was gone, and the crowd was growing restless. He gave a hesitant nod. "All right, miss." "The floor is yours." His tone carried both permission and pity. The guests murmured softly, "This should be good." One man whispered to his wife, who giggled behind her diamond-studded hand. Elena sat down carefully, her knees slightly shaking. She placed her fingers on the edge of the polished keys. Her reflection in the black surface showed a woman who looked small, fragile even, but her eyes burned with quiet determination. For a long second she didn't move. Her mind was a storm, flashes of her childhood piano lessons, her mother's smile, the day she sold her old upright piano, the sound of those cruel laughs from just minutes ago. Behind her a waiter whispered nervously, "What is she doing?" Maria, standing at the back of the room, clasped her hands and whispered, "Just let her play." Elena took a deep breath. Her fingertips brushed the keys like greeting an old friend. The first note came out faint, trembling, like her heart wasn't ready. The second followed, steadier, richer. The melody began to take shape, slow, sorrowful, almost hesitant at first, but as she continued, the hall began to change. The laughter faded, replaced by something else. Silence, the kind that only exists when something unexpected starts to happen. People turned toward one another, their smirks fading. "Wait, she's actually good," someone whispered. Another leaned forward, eyes narrowing. More than good. The music grew, blooming from soft uncertainty to emotional power. Each note carried weight, like words she had never been allowed to speak. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It told a story of pain, struggle, and loss. The kind of story everyone could feel but few could explain. Her hands moved faster, surer, dancing across the keys with muscle memory she thought she had lost. Every note carried a part of her soul, the years of silence, the years of watching her dreams fade while she served others. Her eyes glistened, but her face remained calm. The more she played, the more she remembered who she was. By the third minute, the entire ballroom was silent. The woman who mocked her earlier lowered her glass slowly. Her smile gone, even the waiters at the back stood frozen. Listening, the sound wrapped around the room, filling every corner, every empty heart. Mr. Donovan stood speechless. He had hosted hundreds of events, hired the best musicians, but none of them had ever made the crowd go quiet like this. It wasn't polished. It was real, raw, painfully beautiful. A businessman in the front row felt his throat tighten. He didn't know why, but something in the music reminded him of his own daughter, who hadn't spoken to him in years. A young woman near the back wiped away tears without understanding why. The song reached into places logic couldn't, and Elena, she felt it too, that buried part of her. That broken girl who sold her dreams for survival came alive again. Her fingers no longer hesitated, they flew, weaving a melody that felt like it was coming not from the piano but from the air itself. She imagined her mother sitting in the front row, smiling softly like she used to, whispering, "You'll make them feel what words can't." That thought made her play harder, fiercer, until the notes trembled through her whole body. Just then one of the piano strings gave a faint metallic buzz. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but she didn't stop. Instead, she embraced it, turned it into part of the rhythm. Every imperfection became part of the beauty. Every misstep part of the story. The music began to rise, faster, louder, a storm of emotion that filled the chandelier-lit hall. Her hair slipped from its tie and fell around her face. Her hands blurred across the keys. Her heart pounded. Her entire body became the music. The guests were no longer laughing. They were holding their breath, afraid to break the spell. The man who had mocked her earlier leaned forward unconsciously, his glass forgotten. His wife's eyes were wide. Her fingers pressed against her lips when Elena reached the climax of her piece. She leaned into the final chords, her hands trembling from the force. The sound hit the walls and came back like a wave. Every note echoed like thunder in the marble room. Then just as suddenly it stopped. Her hands froze above the keys. Her chest rose and fell as if she'd run a marathon. For a moment there was nothing. No applause, no words, no movement. The silence was thick, powerful, unshakable. Then somewhere in the back, a single person clapped, another followed, and then the sound grew, louder and louder until it filled the ballroom. People stood cheering, clapping, shouting. The applause rolled over her like ocean waves. Elena blinked, her eyes wet with disbelief. She looked up and saw people standing, the same ones who laughed now cheering, some wiping their tears, others smiling in awe. Even Mr. Donovan was clapping with both hands. A wide grin breaking across his face, she smiled faintly, bowed her head once, and whispered a quiet thank you. Inside, she felt something shift. The fear that had ruled her for years was gone. She realized that she hadn't just played a song. She had reclaimed her voice, her purpose, her story. At the side of the room, Maria wiped her eyes and whispered, "I knew it." And for the first time in years, Elena smiled not as a waitress but as an artist reborn. She didn't know yet what the night would bring, who would approach her, what doors would open. But in that moment, under the golden lights, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer invisible. The last note hung in the air like a ghost refusing to fade. The echo of it shimmered through the golden hall, long after Elena's trembling fingers had stilled on the keys. For a few seconds, the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. The chandeliers above swayed faintly as if even they were holding their breath. And then, like thunder rolling after lightning, the applause began. It wasn't polite or rehearsed this time. It was raw, explosive, unstoppable. People stood from their seats shouting "Bravo!" and clapping until their palms burned. The same guests who once mocked her now craned their necks just to see her face. Some had tears shining under the golden lights. Others smiled like children rediscovering wonder. Elena sat frozen on the piano bench. Her chest rose and fell fast, her breath shaky. She looked around in disbelief. She had only wanted to play, to prove to herself that she still could. But this reaction felt unreal. For a moment, she thought maybe she was dreaming. Maybe she'd wake up back in her small room above the bakery, holding a tray, not a melody. Mr. Donovan hurried onto the stage, clapping loudly, his face glowing with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said breathlessly into the microphone, "I think we just witnessed something extraordinary tonight." The audience cheered again, rising to their feet. Elena stood, unsure what to do with her hands, her apron still tied around her waist, her name tag reflecting the bright stage lights. The crowd looked at her not as a waitress now, but as an artist, a miracle they hadn't expected. But not everyone was clapping out of kindness near the center table. The same woman who had laughed earlier sat stiffly, her smile brittle. "She's just lucky," she muttered under her breath. "Anyone can bang on the keys with enough emotion." Her husband didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Elena, and for the first time there was something like respect there. When the applause finally began to settle, Mr. Donovan gestured for her to speak. "Tell us, miss, what's your name?" "Elena," she said softly, her voice barely carrying. But the microphone caught it, and the sound of her name filled the ballroom. And where did you learn to play like that, Elena? Donovan asked with genuine awe. She hesitated. My mother taught me, she said simply. I haven't played in years. Her honesty struck the room like a soft hammer. Humble, quiet, real. The kind of truth no one expected at such an event filled with glitter and masks. From the crowd, someone shouted, Encore! Another voice echoed, Play again. Elena smiled nervously and shook her head. I think that's enough for tonight. Her hand still trembled slightly from the emotion. Mr. Donovan smiled and nodded. Then, let's all thank Elena for reminding us that true talent doesn't wear a price tag. The applause rose again, but now it felt warmer, more human. People weren't clapping for performance, they were clapping for her. When she stepped off the stage, her legs felt weak. Maria rushed forward from the back, eyes shining with tears. I can't believe you did that, she whispered, hugging her tightly. You were amazing. Elena smiled faintly. I don't even know what came over me. Her voice shook. Maria grinned. It was your moment, and you owned it. They stood there for a while, watching as people whispered and pointed. Her fellow waiters looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with awe. The same people who used to tease her for being quiet now nodded respectfully as she passed. In one corner, a man in a black suit approached quietly. He was older, with silver hair and a kind expression. Miss Elena, he said, extending a hand. That was extraordinary. Thank you, she replied shyly. He smiled. My name's Charles Langford. I run the Langford School of Music downtown. We train gifted musicians. You reminded me of why I started that school. I'd like to offer you something. Come by tomorrow. We'll talk about your future. Elena blinked in shock. My future? He nodded. Yes, my dear. You shouldn't be serving drinks when you can move hearts. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She could only nod, her eyes misting again. But the night wasn't done surprising her. Just as Charles walked away, the same woman from the elite table stepped forward, forcing a smile. Well, she said with a brittle laugh, you certainly gave us a show. Her tone dripped with false sweetness. I suppose even waitresses have their hidden tricks. Elena met her gaze calmly. Not tricks, she said softly, just truth. For a moment, the woman didn't know how to reply. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, and simply turned away as the guests began to leave. Elena lingered by the piano, running her fingers along its smooth edge. Her reflection in the black lacquer was different now. Her eyes brighter, her posture taller. She could almost see her mother standing behind her, smiling, whispering that quiet encouragement again. Mr. Donovan approached one last time. Elena, he said, I want you to know, this night will be remembered for you. Not for the gala, she smiled softly. Thank you, sir, but I think I'm just grateful I got to play again. He nodded, touched by her humility. If you ever want a stage again, this one will always be open to you. When the last guest had left and the lights dimmed, Elena sat down at the piano once more, just her in the quiet room. She pressed one single key in a soft, trembling note that echoed like a heartbeat. Outside, the city slept, unaware that inside this glittering ballroom, a forgotten pianist had just rewritten her story. Elena smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, You see, Mama, I found my way back, and somewhere in the silence that followed, she swore she could almost hear her mother's gentle voice answer, I always knew you would. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently through Elena's small apartment window. The city outside was already alive with noise. Buses honking, vendors calling, people rushing to work. But inside her little room, everything felt strangely still. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone screen, her heart pounding. Her performance from the night before was all over social media. Someone had recorded the entire thing, from the moment she stepped up to the piano to the last note that silenced the ballroom. The video's title read, Waitress stuns the elite with heartbreaking piano performance at gala. Underneath, comments poured in by the hundreds. Pure magic. She played like her soul was on fire. Find this woman and give her a record deal. Elena scrolled slowly, her eyes wide, her chest tight. She could barely believe what she was seeing. Each comment felt like a dream come to life. For years she had been invisible, but now the world saw her. The same people who ignored her at the gala were now sharing her name. Her phone buzzed again and again with messages from co-workers and even strangers. Maria had sent a dozen voice notes, each one louder than the last. Elena, you're famous. You're on the news. They're calling you the Waitress pianist. Can you believe it? Elena laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in a long time. Famous, she whispered, shaking her head. The word felt too big, too unreal. She looked around her tiny apartment, peeling wallpaper, the smell of coffee drifting from the hallway, and thought how nothing here had changed, and yet everything had. As she got ready for work, her phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Good morning, Miss Elena, came a warm, professional voice. This is Charles Langford from the Langford School of Music. We spoke last night, her breath caught. Yes, of course, she said quickly. Mr. Langford? Hello? I meant what I said, he continued. I've already spoken to my board. We'd like to offer you a scholarship, full coverage, mentorship, and a performance opportunity at our annual showcase next month. Elena nearly dropped the phone. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said kindly. Chuckling. You have something we can't teach. Soul. Passion, truth, that's what music schools forget sometimes. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, sir, she whispered. I'll be there. After hanging up, she sat in silence for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. Her heart swelled with joy and fear all at once. It had been years since she stepped into a music hall as a performer. Could she really start again? But as she looked at her hands, the same ones that once trembled under the chandelier lights, she smiled. Yes, she murmured, I can. That evening at work, the atmosphere was completely different. The moment she entered the Silvercrest Hotel, heads turned. The same staff who once barely noticed her now whispered her name with pride. That's her, the pianist from last night, one waiter said. She's all over the internet. Even the manager, a usually strict man with a permanent frown, approached her with a hesitant smile. Elena, he said awkwardly. I saw the video, truly. Remarkable, you made this place proud. She thanked him politely. Though her mind was already elsewhere and on the piano, on the music, on what lay ahead, during a quiet moment that night, she slipped back into the ballroom. The lights were dim, the tables empty. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the space. She walked up to the piano again, the same one that had changed her life. Her fingers traced the keys and she smiled behind her. She heard footsteps. It was Mr. Donovan, holding 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't stay away, could you? He said with a gentle grin. I guess not, she admitted. This place feels different now. He handed her one of the cups. You know, I've worked here 20 years. Seen a lot of performances, but last night was the first time I saw people feel something real. She smiled softly. I wasn't performing for them, I was just remembering. He nodded thoughtfully. That's why it worked. They stood there for a while, sipping coffee in silence. Then Donovan said, You know, people like you remind us why art matters. It humbles the proud, lifts the broken, and tells the truth no one else dares to say. Elena looked up at the empty seats, imagining them filled again. I used to think my dream was dead, she said quietly. But maybe it was just sleeping. He chuckled. Then don't let it fall asleep again. She laughed softly, a sound light and full of hope. The next day, when she arrived at the music school, she felt like she was walking into her past and her future at once. The hall smelled of old wood and chalk. Students practiced scales behind doors. Her heart raced with every step. Mr. Langford greeted her warmly, leading her to a grand rehearsal room with sunlight spilling across the piano. This will be yours, he said, for as long as you want to play. Elena touched the keys gently, the familiar sound filling the room. Her eyes sparkled. It feels like home, she whispered. Langford smiled. It should. Welcome back. Elena. As she began to play softly, the notes filled the space with something fragile yet powerful. It wasn't the sound of someone trying to prove herself anymore. It was the sound of someone finally free. Outside the room, students stopped to listen. Drawn by the haunting melody, some whispered, Is that her? The waitress pianist? Inside, Elena played on, unaware of the small crowd gathering beyond the door. Her music flowed like sunlight breaking through clouds, each note a promise to never disappear again. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible, she felt infinite. Every note she played whispered one truth, that no matter how far she had fallen, Music had been waiting all along to lift her back up. Rain poured outside the Langford School of Music that night, heavy and relentless, but inside the rehearsal room, it was all warmth and light. Elena sat at the piano, her fingers gliding across the keys. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glossy surface. Calm, confident, alive. The girl who once hid behind serving trays was gone. The woman sitting here had fire in her fingertips. Every evening since her performance at the gala, Elena came here after work. Mr. Langford had insisted she quit her waitress job, but she refused. Not yet, she had told him. I want to earn every note. So she worked by day and practiced by night, pouring her exhaustion into the piano until the music became her heartbeat. One evening, as she finished playing, she heard soft clapping behind her. It was Mr. Langford standing by the doorway, smiling proudly. You've grown, Elena, he said. Do you realize what you've done in just a few weeks? She smiled shyly. I'm just trying to make up for lost time. He shook his head. No, you're doing more than that. You're rewriting your story. Those words stayed with her as she prepared for the school's annual showcase, a grand concert where only the most promising students were chosen to perform. And this year, she wasn't just a student. She was the main event. The waitress pianist everyone was talking about. The night of the showcase arrived faster than she expected. The concert hall was filled to the brim, critics, musicians, and reporters eager to see if the viral video sensation was truly as good as the internet claimed. Elena peeked from behind the curtains, her heart thundering. She spotted familiar faces in the audience. Mr. Donovan sat near the front, Maria beside him, grinning proudly. Even the Silvercrest hotel manager had come, awkwardly dressed in a tuxedo behind them. Strangers held up their phones, ready to record the moment. Ready? Mr. Langford asked gently. Placing a hand on her shoulder, she took a breath. Yes. The host stepped on stage and introduced her. Tonight, we welcome a woman whose story has touched hearts across the world. A reminder that art can bloom from anywhere. Please welcome Elena Dawson. The lights dimmed, the applause began, and Elena stepped onto the stage. The same kind of silence fell as it had that night in the ballroom. But this time it wasn't disbelief, it was anticipation. She sat down, her hands resting on the keys. The spotlight warmed her face. For a heartbeat, she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice. Make them feel what words can't. Then she began to play. The music started soft, almost like a whisper. It carried the same emotions that had first stunned the elite: loss, love, pain, and hope. But this time, it was fuller, stronger. Each note was a step forward. Every melody a declaration: I'm not invisible anymore. The audience was captivated. Not a single cough or shuffle in the hall. The camera lights flickered faintly. Recording her every motion, her fingers moved faster, blending sorrow and joy like two old friends meeting again. In the back row, a man in a dark suit watched intently. He wasn't clapping or smiling like the others. He was studying her. When she finished her piece, the applause thundered once more. People stood, shouting her name, Elena, Elena! But the man slipped out quietly before it ended, leaving only a card on the organizer's desk. After the concert, Elena walked backstage, her body trembling from adrenaline. Mr. Langford hugged her tightly. You did it, he said. You just became something no school can teach. Unforgettable. Reporters swarmed around, microphones flashing. Elena, what's next for you? Will you be signing a record deal? How does it feel to be a global inspiration? She smiled humbly, answering softly. I just want to keep playing. That's all I ever wanted. But amid the chaos, the stage manager approached her with a small white card. Someone left this for you, he said. She took it, curious. The card was plain except for a logo at the bottom. Harrington Music Foundation, one of the biggest classical labels in Europe. A handwritten note read, We saw your story. We want to hear more. Call us on Victor Harrington. Her hands trembled. She had heard the name before. Victor Harrington was a legend in the music world, a man known for discovering prodigies and turning them into stars. That night, Elena lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The rain tapped against the window like soft applause. Could this really be happening? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. What if she wasn't ready? What if fame destroyed the simplicity she had just begun to love again? The next morning, she met Mr. Langford in his office. Showing him the card, he smiled knowingly. I was hoping this would happen. They've been watching you since your video went viral. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted. I'm still learning. He leaned forward. Eyes gentle. Elena, music isn't about being ready. It's about being honest. That's what you have. Honesty? They can polish the rest. She nodded slowly, clutching the card. Then I'll call. When she finally dialed the number, Victor's assistant answered immediately. We've been expecting your call, Miss Dawson. Mr. Harrington would like to meet you in London next week. London. The word itself felt like a dream. Elena hung up, her heart racing. Everything was changing again, faster than she could process. That evening, she returned to the Silvercrest one last time, walking through the quiet ballroom that had started it all. The piano still stood there, untouched, gleaming under soft lights. She sat down and ran her fingers across the keys, playing the same melody from that unforgettable night. As the notes filled the empty room, she smiled through tears. It all started here, she whispered, and now? The whole world is listening. The sound echoed softly through the golden hall. Blending with the hum of the city outside, Elena closed her eyes and let the music carry her, not realizing that across the world, millions were already waiting for her next song. The plane touched down in London under a silver sky, raindrops streaking the window like faint piano notes sliding down glass. Elena leaned her head against the seat, heart pounding with a mix of awe and disbelief. Just a few months ago, she had been carrying trays in a hotel ballroom. Now she was here, invited to meet one of the world's most powerful music producers. When she stepped out of the airport, the cool air hit her face. The city was alive, buses roaring, street musicians playing under gray bridges. The smell of rain, coffee, and possibility filled her senses. She clutched the small worn bag she had carried for years. Inside it was her only good dress, her old music notebook, and the silver locket that belonged to her mother. A sleek black car waited outside with a driver holding a sign that read, Miss Dawson. She smiled shyly and got in. Watching the city blur past, London felt both terrifying and magical, like a stage much larger than she had ever imagined. The car stopped in front of the Harrington Music Foundation's headquarters, a tall glass building that reflected the stormy sky above. Inside, everything gleamed, marble floors, gold accents, and walls lined with framed platinum records. She could see names she'd grown up admiring, musicians who had shaped the world. A young assistant greeted her warmly. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Right this way. Elena followed her through a long hallway until they reached a grand office overlooking the River Thames. The man behind the desk rose as she entered, tall, silver-haired, with sharp but kind eyes. Elena Dawson, he said, extending his hand. I've been waiting to meet you. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had built empires, yet there was warmth in it. She shook his hand, trying to calm her nerves. It's an honor. Mr. Harrington, please. Call me Victor, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I watched your video from the Silvercrest Gala. Then your showcase performance. You have something rare. Elena blushed slightly. Thank you, sir. I just play what I feel, he smiled. That's exactly why people listen. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. I've seen technical perfection 1,000 times, but you remind people what music used to mean. You tell stories without words. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Her throat tight with emotion, Victor continued. I want to produce your first album. We'll call it Songs of the Invisible, inspired by your journey. I'll give you full creative control, as long as you promise one thing. Never lose what made you special. Her eyes widened. My own album? He nodded, smiling. You earned it, Elena, and I think the world needs your kind of truth right now. For a moment, she could only stare at him, the words sinking in slowly like sunlight breaking through clouds. She had dreamed of this all her life, but it had always felt impossible. When do we start? She finally asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Tomorrow morning, Victor said with a grin. And Elena, one more thing. Your mother would be proud. Her breath caught. How do you? He pointed to the locket around her neck. You wear her close when you play. I saw it in every video. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded silently, unable to speak. The next day, the studio came alive with sound. Musicians, engineers, and technicians filled the room. But when Elena sat at the piano, the room grew quiet. Everyone waited, and then she played. The recording began with the same melody that had once silenced the elite in the ballroom. But this time it was fuller, richer, surrounded by strings and soft percussion. Yet even with all the new layers, her soul was still at the center of every note. For hours she played, recording song after song, each one a piece of her past transformed into something beautiful. Her childhood lullabies, her mother's humming while folding laundry, the quiet ache of working nights at the hotel, the loneliness, the hope, the rebirth. All of it lived in her music now. During a short break, Victor walked in with his arms folded. "You know what's special about you, Elena?" he asked. "You don't play for fame, you play for truth. That's why people can't stop listening." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe that's because the truth is all I ever had left." He chuckled softly, then never let it go. Weeks passed like a dream. Her album neared completion and news spread fast. The mysterious Waitress pianist was about to release her debut. Critics called her the heart of modern classical. Magazines wanted her story. Talk shows invited her. But Elena stayed grounded. She refused to move into luxury housing or hire a stylist. She still took the bus, still practiced until her fingers ached. But one evening, as she sat in the empty studio finishing the final track, Victor entered quietly and placed a newspaper on the piano. The headline read, "From Waitress to World Stage, the woman who changed the sound of hope." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's too much." He smiled. "No, Elena, it's just right." That night, when everyone left, she stayed behind alone. The city outside sparkled against the river. She opened her locket and stared at the tiny photograph of her mother. "I wish you could see this," she whispered. "You always said music would find me again. You were right." She pressed a single key, a low, gentle note, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll play for you." The next day, she was scheduled to perform live for the first time. A televised concert broadcast to millions. She didn't know it yet, but that performance would make her name immortal. As she walked out of the studio, the rain began to fall again, the same kind of rain that once tapped on her window back home. But this time, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like applause from the heavens, soft, endless, and proud. The night of the concert arrived like a dream wrapped in light. The Royal Albert Hall shimmered beneath the London sky, its domed roof glowing like a crown under the spotlights. Inside, every seat was filled. Critics, celebrities, musicians, and ordinary people who had seen that viral video months ago and felt something stir inside them. The air hummed with quiet anticipation, a collective breath waiting to be held. Backstage, Elena sat at a grand piano, her fingers resting on the keys, not playing yet, just feeling them. Her heart pounded in her chest, loud enough to drown out the noise of the crew and the murmur of the crowd. She was no longer the invisible waitress in a plain apron, but she hadn't let fame change her. Her simple black dress reflected her nature. Elegant, humble, real. Mr. Langford had flown in to watch her, Maria too, both seated proudly in the second row. Even Mr. Donovan from the Silvercrest Hotel was there, smiling nervously. "That's our Elena," he whispered to Maria, who nodded through tears. Backstage, Victor Harrington walked in, calm and confident. "It's time," he said. "Are you ready?" Elena smiled faintly. "I don't think anyone's ever truly ready for their dream." He chuckled. "Maybe not, but when it's yours, you play it into existence." He squeezed her shoulder. "Do what you always do. Play with truth." The stage manager gave the signal. The house lights dimmed, and the crowd fell silent. A hush so deep it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then the curtains drew back, revealing the woman who had become a symbol of quiet resilience. Elena walked to the center of the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The audience rose to greet her with thunderous applause, flashes of cameras lighting up like stars. She bowed once, gracefully, then sat before the piano. For a moment she closed her eyes, her fingers hovered above the keys, and she whispered, "This one's for you, Mama." The first note echoed. Soft, haunting, tender. It rolled through the massive hall like the first drop of rain before a storm. Her melody began to weave its story. The sound of struggle, of loss, of rediscovery. It wasn't just music anymore. It was memory turned to sound, pain turned to beauty. As she played, scenes from her life flashed in her mind. Her mother's tired smile, the smell of baking bread, the weight of the trays she used to carry, the humiliation of spilled wine, the laughter that once mocked her. Then came the night she stood up and played in defiance, the applause that washed over her, the fire that awoke in her soul. Every emotion poured through her fingers, and the audience felt it. The melody rose higher, swirling through the air like something alive. People wiped tears without realizing it. Couples held hands, strangers leaned forward, unable to look away. Halfway through, a violin joined her, a soft harmony that lifted her notes higher. Then a cello, deep and steady like a heartbeat. The orchestra joined one by one until her song became something vast and celestial. The sound filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around everyone present. From the balcony, a young girl watched with shining eyes, whispering to her mother, "I want to play like her someday." And in that moment, Elena unknowingly passed on the same spark her mother once gave her. As the piece reached its climax, Elena leaned into the final keys, her hair falling around her face. Her fingers blurred with speed and emotion, and when the final note came, long, trembling, eternal, she held it until her whole body shook. Then silence, a silence so powerful that it felt sacred. No one dared breathe. The sound lingered, fading into memory, and then applause, thunderous and endless. The crowd stood, people cried openly. Some shouted her name, others simply stared, too moved to speak. Victor stood backstage, eyes wet, clapping harder than anyone. Mr. Langford smiled proudly, whispering, "You did it, my girl, you did it." Elena rose from the piano bench, tears shining on her cheeks. She bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the sea of standing faces. For a moment, she thought of her mother again, and imagined her sitting somewhere in the front row, smiling softly like she used to, whispering, "You made them feel what words can't." After the concert, the reporters gathered, microphones flashing. "Elena, how does it feel to go from waitress to world sensation? What's next for you?" She smiled gently, her voice calm but strong. "It feels like coming home. Music was always waiting for me. I just had to find my way back." That line would become the quote printed in every newspaper the next day. Weeks passed, and the concert went viral. Millions watched, millions cried. Her name was now known around the world. Yet she stayed humble. She didn't buy mansions or expensive cars. Instead, she founded a small foundation in her mother's name. The Dawson Trust for Hidden Talent, giving scholarships to children who couldn't afford music lessons. One afternoon, she visited her old neighborhood, the small bakery still standing. The smell of fresh bread filled the air just like it used to. She walked past her old apartment, touching the worn brick wall with a smile. "You were my first stage," she whispered. Later that evening, she visited the Silvercrest Hotel. The ballroom was empty, quiet, dust motes floating in the fading light. The same grand piano still stood on stage. Untouched, she sat down and played one last song, soft, personal, full of gratitude. This time there was no audience, no cameras, no applause, just her and the piano. Her fingers moved gently, every note a thank you, every melody a memory. When she finished, she closed the piano lid and smiled through quiet tears. "You were never just an instrument," she whispered. "You were my way back to life." Outside, the city lights flickered on, and Elena stepped into the night. Her reflection shone faintly in the glass doors as they closed behind her, a woman who once served others now serving the world through her art. And as she walked down the street, the wind carried a sound that only she could hear. The faint echo of her mother's voice, warm and proud, whispering, "You were never invisible, Elena. The world just hadn't started listening yet."